Rafa Marquez to take over for a World Cup was Rafa Marquez as an assistant coach in 2022 to take over the home World Cup. You're late to the party.
You're talking about going back and giving the keys after the 2022 World Cup to a guy who had never coached. I love the player Rafa Marquez was. I named my son after him. But that's giving the keys to a teenager. Welcome, everybody, into episode 9 of Duel Nats here on Vamos and the Men in Blazers Media Network. I'm Sebastian Salazar, and that is birthday boy Hercules Gomez. What's up, my man?
What's up, Sebi? Was my birthday. I feel very young being next to you. You make me feel like a kid again. Standing next to you makes me feel young at heart.
Herc, I'm glad we brought up your age because it's going to be the theme of this episode here on Duel Nats. Not your age, specifically 44, the big 4-4, but age in general, not just the present, but also kind of the future of both the U.S. men's national teams and the Mexican national team, looking at the 2026 World Cup, but also with an eye on 2030 and beyond. At the end of the episode, we are going to be taking your questions off social media. Go ahead and at me. But I want to start with something from social media here, Herc, and it's actually a tweet of yours. You did have a good one. Basically, you made the point that since 1990, the U.S. has only missed having an under-20 player, right? So 20 years of age or under, on their roster in 2 World Cups in the modern era, right? Those 2 World Cups happen to be 1998 and 2006, and you pointed out also, kind of in your series of tweets, that those are 2 of the 3 group phase exits in the modern era. 1990 was also a group phase exit, but there's kind of an asterisk there. It was generally a really young team back there.
Correct.
So I want to discuss kind of the importance of that profile, generally to teams. Is it something that a team can live without? Is it something that a team needs? Maybe go through some of the historic examples for the United States. And then also who it might be this time around, because I know your tweet kind of came in the aftermath of a golazo from Zavier Gozo, who is a teenager who you think might be able to get into that conversation. But I want to tap your memory banks first. You were on a World Cup team in 2010.
Correct.
That team made it out of the group phase.
We did. We won the group.
And so that means there was a guy, 20 and under, according to your tweet, on that team. I looked it up. There was only one. Do you remember who it was?
Jozy Altidore. And he's a bit of an outlier because Jozy had been playing with the national team for like 3 years. He wasn't a complete unknown that came out of nowhere. I was the complete unknown who came out of nowhere, if I'm being honest. I had a national team experience. 2007, Copa America. I debuted with the national team against Argentina. Very proud of that. Most, players around the world in CONCACAF, if they play for a Mexico or a U.S., they'll get the first cap against, with all due respect, a Caribbean country or a Central American country or not a big boy, if you will. I got my first cap against Argentina. That was my welcome, to the big boys stage in a Copa America. That was Messi, Carlos Tevez, Crespo, Riquelme, Heinze, Mascherano. I go through ridiculous lists. I'm very proud of my way through the national team. But that was it. Like, I had my moment in the sun, Copa America, come back, tore my ACL, and I thought that my career was over. So I was relatively unknown because I had 0 caps leading up to that World Cup cycle. Like World Cup qualifying, I was invited to 0 camps. I had 0 minutes, and I made my way to the World Cup. Jozy was a mainstay. Jozy was playing for Bob Bradley when he was like 16, 17 years old.
Do you remember the role that Jozy had at that World Cup?
He was number 9. He was starting 9.
He started every single game as a 20-year-old at that World Cup. Yeah.
Well, think about this for a second, Seb. Jozy had also the experience with Bob in the U.S. men's national team of leading the line in a Confederations Cup, of scoring a goal against Spain, of ending their 35-game unbeaten streak, of being up 2-0 before a ridiculous comeback in the final versus Brazil. Like, he had already had these tried and proven moments with the U.S. men's national team. So he's kind of an outlier here.
Mm-hmm. He is, but he's the guy in that group, and I bring him up to say that when you have a 20 and under player, oftentimes the idea is thinking of it as like a guy for the future. Maybe a guy who's going to have a smaller role in these World Cups. But actually, and I'll go through the list here, if you look at the U.S. examples, they're pretty significant, Herc. To your tweet, which suggests this team may need it, If you look back at the teams, 90s kind of the asterisk. There were 3 guys 20 and under. Our former colleague, your still colleague at ESPN, Casey Keller, didn't play. Eric Winalda had a huge role in that team till he got a red card against Czechoslovakia. And Chris Henderson. 1994, Claudio Reyna is the example. And this is a really interesting one, Herc, because Claudio tears his hamstring right before the 1994 World Cup. And it's pretty much like, unless they make it deep, and you're really looking quarterfinals or beyond, he's pretty much not going to play. They take him anyway. He doesn't end up playing. But if you look at his career, you can see that experience, and he even talked about that experience being so important to his development, had a long-term impact. He represents the U.S. in 3 World Cups, probably, right, the best U.S. performance ever at a World Cup across multiple games in 2002. I think that's not even much of an argument for how good he was in that run to the quarterfinals. And if you think about it, really, and you look back at his career, he makes his move to Europe after that World Cup, I think in large part for being on that U.S. World Cup roster. So that goes to the case of sometimes you do throw a guy on there just for his career, just for the future, and it can help you. Josie's the example in 2010. 2002 is loaded with guys, DeMarcus, Landon. Those guys play huge roles in that run to the quarterfinals. 2014, it's interesting. It's Julian Green, who everybody picks at, but scores a goal in the knockout rounds. And then it's DeAndre Yedlin, who has a pretty significant role coming off the bench as like a super sub and actually sets up a big goal against Portugal, if memory serves. 18, obviously, nobody goes. 22, it's Musa, Reyna, and Scally that are 20 and under. Musa's really the only one with a big role, but think about it, Herc. As a teenager, he starts in that MMA midfield, and that's really what drives them through the group phase. So I say all of that to give you the examples in American history of those guys 20 and under, and then ask you, how critical is that role to a group? Do you think that you really need it in every team? Because your tweet suggests that if you don't have it, you're going home in the group phase.
You know what's crazy here, Seb? You and I have been around the game long enough, and you see kids too naive to grasp the moment. So they have a big moment. Like, the first World Cup that I remember is 1994. You went to some games. It changed your life. I saw it. You know, it didn't change my life in the way that it could have changed my life, like 2002. I was a teenager in 2002, and I'm sitting there watching these games late night because they're in South Korea and Japan, very late night in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm looking across the TV onto the screen. I'm seeing Landon Donovan, DeMarcus Beasley, 1982 age group. That's my age group. Teenagers playing on the world stage, shocking the world versus Portugal. And I'm thinking to myself, that's where I want to be. I want to be there. Landon Donovan and DeMarcus Beasley were too naive to grasp the moment. So they just played freely. And Landon was voted best young player of the tournament. And when you go through the history, and I'm glad you brought up 1990, because most people think like the U.S. soccer's had this rich history. They don't realize there was a gap of, I believe, 50 years?
40 years, 1950 to 1990 without a World Cup.
40 years without a World Cup. And that team that finally made it to the 1990, they were all kids. Like, forget teenagers, 20-year-olds. Like, the majority of them were college kids. That's who they were. So that exit was an experience. It was in itself its own victory, just getting back to the World Cup. But you go back to the others, and you don't have that sense of youth, the sense of carefree play. Your young players aren't there. You're not thinking about the future. You're only thinking maybe about the immediate. And in thinking about the immediate, you lose a sense of who you are and kind of what had gotten you there, and what makes you, at that moment, still a developing country in terms of football. Because you're not the Brazils, you're not the Argentinas. And by the way, they do produce teenagers. They do produce U20 players in these World Cups. I think it's important for the United States to think about the future. It's important for them to think about the next generation. And in thinking about the next generation, things have always gone well enough. And I say well enough because you and I will sit here and talk about what is a successful World Cup, and you and I cover the Mexican national team as well. And one of the easiest outs for anybody who seeks change is, well, we've done this, and when we try to do it this way, it's the same thing. nothing different happens. So why should we keep doing it? Or why should we keep trying something different? You know, naturalizados or young players. Es la misma cosa, they would say. And you shouldn't fall in that trap if you're the U.S. men's national team. When you've had somewhat of a successful tournament, is because the youth has carried you in some way, shape, or form.
I agree, but I think there's like a difference between taking a young guy for the sake of the program or for taking a young guy's sake versus taking a young guy for the impact they can provide. And I think like a lot of times, specifically the impact that you see is kind of a physical impact. Like usually if you bring a young player, there's some explosiveness to them that you're bringing them for that maybe other guys don't have. And I think you and I have had this conversation kind of running for maybe a decade since we've been working together about international football being like a younger and younger man's game, a more and more athletic game. And so maybe that role of the younger player is more important. You can get more impact out of it than before. But if we look at this pool, Herc, for the U.S., there isn't really an obvious likely candidate to be that guy 20 and under. There was nobody in the March window, and the name that you would really point to would be the 19-year-old Noah Kai Banks. We've talked about him a lot. He had a chance, it seems, to come in the March window and chose not to. So I think we put him to the side for a second. Before we get into like some of the specific candidates, do you think this team needs it? And in what kind of role would you want that player to be?
I think this team could use it. And you know what? 26 players gives you no reason not to think about the future. Like, that's a reality, Seb. When I played, it was 23 players, and you're like, okay, there's a chance that player number 22, 23 will get on the field. Player 24, 25, 26 most likely won't get on the field. Joe Scally was that player last cycle. He didn't get on the field. There are going to be players who don't get on the field. Christian Roldan was that player, you know. But that experience is valuable. It's everlasting. It's impactful in a way that can change the development of a country. Most people don't realize this, but 1994 World Cup, okay? I want you to go rewind the tape. Go back and look at the penalty kick, Seb. When the Brazilian players are arm in arm next to each other, look at who they are. And then you're going to see this little bald-headed, gap-toothed kid. Do you know who that is? That's Il
Fenomeno.
Ronaldo. That is Ronaldo. Okay? That is what they are giving this kid valuable experience to one day be the best player in the world, to one day be a World Cup winner, to one day be a record holder of World Cup goals. You're building for something. You've got to do the same thing here. Now, I understand that most people are going to say, well, they've got to earn these things. I agree with you, but we're way past they have to earn it. The 2022 Qatar team for the World Cup, for the U.S. men's national team, did not earn their call-ups. It was blown up and given to them. And I say this respectfully. The only player in that program who earned his call-up was Christian Pulisic. The rest were given. Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Luca De La Torre, even an Anthony Robinson who was in the championship at the time, those call-ups were given out of necessity.
You say given because the previous generation was wiped out?
Correct. So out of those ashes come these players, and if you look at the very next call-up, those players are coached by Dave Sarek and Sebi. And most of you probably remember that the program took a step back once again because they had to wait for Greg Berhalter to finish his job with the Columbus Crew. So Dave Sarachan was an interim manager, and you wasted away again. There are two cycles where examples of you waste away time. And in that time that he's caretaker, he's babysitting these kids, and they're getting national team appearances. There once was a time in CONCACAF where you had to really stand out to earn a national team appearance. It had nothing to do with potential. We're past that. We're past that. Teams, club teams, and national teams will make a bet, will roll the dice on potential. The U.S. men's national team right now doesn't have the luxury of trying to stifle potential, especially with 26 spots.
So let's talk about the guys who might actually grab that spot, because I think it's a real outside chance. We're only 70-some days, 60-some days now until the World Cup. We only have a few games left. They'll be played literally right before the World Cup. So it would take something, you figure, really special. I'm trying to think of the circumstances under which this could happen, right? I think it has to be an MLS guy probably, because they're going to have to be catching fire here in the next few months as the season kicks up, as opposed to like trying to establish themselves or get minutes in the European scene. It might be somebody in Europe. I have somebody in my kind of list of candidates that is in Europe. But Herc, I wonder who it would be for you and why you would include them in this World Cup as like not just a play for the future, but maybe somebody that can help this team right now.
If there is a position that is lacking right now on the U.S. men's national team, I think it's fair to say it's the winger position, where maybe your only true winger, actual winger, is Timothy Weah. So if I'm looking for a player that gives me a different profile, that is exciting, that is, as you say, explosive, can make a name for himself, and is a young man right now riding confidently that wave, I would say Zavier Gozo. He's the only player we could think of that fits the profile, playing here or abroad, with that type of confidence. The kid has size, speed, and dribbling ability, 1v1 creation, space for himself and others that I think many in this player pool do not have. So because of his profile, I think it kind of sets him apart. Now, I'm not saying the kid goes to the World Cup and is going to be somebody, but crazier things have happened. Julian Green has a knockout game goal. Julian Green has more goals in the knockout rounds than Cristiano Ronaldo, right? There are players in the history of the program that have come out of nowhere, really, and have been factors. Zavier Gozo, because of his profile, isn't that crazy of a shout?
Hey, I would have thought if you were going to pick somebody from MLS, it would have been Julian Hall, the kid who's scoring all the goals for Red Bulls. He can play a little striker. He can play a little winger. And at a goal a game right now, if you just think about it, if he keeps that up, and now you got a real issue with Ajiman going down, you've got another spot potentially at striker. I don't know. That would have been the attacking player I might have thought you would have gone with.
Yeah, you know what? I thought about him, but he's not really a 9.
Maybe to your point, that's not what you're looking for from this. He can score goals. You know he can do that at club level, playing the 9. But he is a winger. He has played winger as well.
I've not seen enough of him as a winger, to be honest. And what I've seen of him as a 9, listen, he looks like the Josie Altidore profile. Most people don't remember Josie Altidore as a teenager. He wasn't this big, bulky 9. He didn't have size to him. I mean, he was physically big for his size, but he was lanky. And he liked to drift wide, and he thought he was like Thierry Henry-like, because he liked to go at guys, and he slowly started being converted into a 9, a very good 9, but that wasn't his profile. Julian Hall is a very good player, and certainly will have a bright future, but if I'm looking at profile, the 9 profile right now isn't one that I'm so desperate to kind of cover. I think Fowler and Balogun, I think Haji Wright, I think Ricardo Pepi, that's 3 right there. And for Mauricio Pochettino, you've got a 4th in Christian Pulisic. I think that's covered right now.
I want to throw one more name at you and see if you'll agree with me here as I make the case for this player. So Diego Kochen, the young goalie that's in the Barcelona system, he's still eligible to play for other countries, right? So obviously he's represented the U.S., like playing in a World Cup. He'd still, I guess, in theory, have the one-time switch at his disposal. But you would think that being in a World Cup team would really, I think, lock him into the program. He's a safe bet to be your goalie of the future, or a bet to be your goalie of the future, a position that, like, we used to run the show in and now obviously are struggling in. And it's a guy who, to your Ronaldo point, 94, you might bring him along now as a third goalie. He's not going to play. He gets the experience factor, and maybe he's your number 1 or your number 2 in 2 or 3 more World Cups down the road. If I had to pick an under 20 right now, that actually might be the guy I would pick, thinking long-term about the good of the program.
I don't know how much him being in Barcelona helps or hurts the kid, but I see no reason why, if the second and third goalkeepers have 0 caps, this kid shouldn't be in the mix, and he's not.
All right, lots more of this over on our YouTube channel, Vamos Network. You can like and subscribe over there. Follow us on social media as well, Vamos MIB on Instagram and Twitter. All right, Herc, that time of the show where we focus in on Mexico. We will also be talking about the Mexican national team's future, but instead of starting with young players, there's a young core. We'll get to them in just a second. Let's start with a young coach, actually a young assistant coach, relatively young, of course, older than the both of us, thankfully. Rafa Marquez, who is 47 years young. There was some reports last week out of Mexico that there's a huge payout, apparently, if Mexico doesn't make him the manager after the World Cup, so all the more reason to follow through with the plans that we'd already heard. And there's actually reports, too, that he's starting to build his staff for whenever the World Cup concludes. Guys like Andres Guardado, Alfredo Talavera, just to name a few of the names linked there to a future staff for Rafa Marquez. So let's begin with the big idea, Herc. Giving the job to Rafa Marquez after the 2026 World Cup but basically guaranteeing that job before we've even known how the 2026 World Cup unfolded. How confident are you that that'll work?
Zero confidence that it'll even happen. You're talking about a federation that is still paying off Diego Coca. He signed a 4-year deal, I believe had 4 games. That is still paying off Jaime Lozano. Jaime Lozano was guaranteed in this World Cup cycle. The sporting director of the federation put his stamp of approval that he would be here in the 2026 World Cup. He is not. Same federation that gave Victor Manuel Vucetich a contract for the World Cup lasted about 2 weeks, 2 games, and then went Miguel Herrera, El Piojo Herrera. So I've got zero faith in this federation actually keeping their word. And yeah, it could be a massive buyout, but they're still paying off coaches. So zero faith. And quite frankly, I wish it would happen, but I don't think it'll happen. And the timing of this couldn't be worse. Rafa Marquez to take over for a World Cup was Rafa Marquez as an assistant coach in 2022 to take over the home World Cup. You're late to the party. You're late to the party. The World Cup that mattered was on home soil 2026. What I would have given to see this great crop of players, because it is a great crop of players, young players, already have that know-how, that expertise, already have that experience. It's not just Gilberto Mora. It's not just Elias Montiel. It's not just Obed Vargas. There are some really good players here. You know, Iker Fimbres. You've got Ochoa, who's a dual national Mexican-American. He's a backup right now at Cruz Azul. Emi Ochoa. You've got players who right now, Everardo Lopez is part of this pool right now. Probably won't make it to the World Cup.
Called in the March
back.
window.
Called into a couple windows already. This kid should already have more experience. You could build something here. There's enough talent here for you to say, yeah, sure. Yael Padilla, Diego Sanchez of Tigres, Alexei Dominguez, Hugo Camberos. Like, if you would have given these players already 3 years of experience in and out with some quality veteran leadership, you would be talking about having an exciting home World Cup. Well, you shouldn't be talking about 2030 with Rafa Marquez. This should have been done years ago.
I'm intrigued. This is not where I thought you were going to take the conversation. We can address the conspiracy side of it in a little bit, but your point is interesting. You're suggesting that Rafa Marquez is not a man for the future, instead a man for the past. I want to push that a little bit. How far back would you have given him the job? There were many opportunities. You might say 2024 after the Copa America. That wouldn't be the 3-year run-up you're talking about. That would still be, a year and a half. You could have done it after the 2022 World Cup. But Herc, if you're being honest about that, in 2022, he had just started coaching Barcelona Athletic. Is that not too thin of a managerial resume to give him the senior national team job ahead of a World Cup that you're saying is the biggest ever? Do you not want some managerial experience? You're talking about going back and giving the keys after the 2022 World Cup to a guy who had never coached. I love the player Rafa Marquez was. I named my son after him. But that's giving the keys to a teenager.
What experience has he gained since?
2 years running Barcelona Athletic, and now a couple years as Javier Aguirre's assistant, running a national team. That's got to be invaluable experience.
Invaluable experience sitting behind Javier Aguirre and watching him play a pragmatic type of football. Listen,
you don't see any risk in naming a Rafa Marquez who had never coached anything other than Alcalá U15s as the Mexican national team manager.
You're already taking that risk. You're just late to the party. Do you realize that this World Cup 2026, how many U25 players Mexico will have on its roster with World Cup experience?
None.
If you think he's good enough for 2030, he should have been good enough for 2026. You should already start integrating the next generation. You're not bringing in Rafa Marquez because he's coached Barcelona B. That's not why you're bringing Rafa Marquez in. You're bringing him because he is a legend of Mexican football. You're bringing him in because he inspires hope for the people, the fans of Mexico. 2030 is a lost opportunity. It should have been 2026. Which is why I don't think 2030 is even relevant to the conversation of if he will be there. Because most likely, history has told us or taught us, he won't be there.
I hear you, right? Mexico has had, 4 managers since the last World Cup. It's a federation that loves to fire guys as quickly as it likes to hire them. There's absolutely a history of that. I think the payouts that you mentioned might actually work in Rafa Marquez's favor. At some point, you start to pile up so many payouts that you change the way you do business. I think he was smart in getting that payout in the contract because he knows if they do want to change, if they do want to go back on their word, FMF, it'll cost them a pretty penny. I want to ask you about the idea that you touched on, the hope that he would bring, that he could bring. That hope would definitely resonate with me as a fan. That hope would, I think, resonate with the press a lot because of the weight of his name. In a locker room, to players, how much does that resonate versus what I think is the issue of a guy who hasn't really done it before in the instance you're talking about? Because I could see a hero of yours standing in front of you having a huge motivational impact.
Who's not seen the video of Zinedine Zidane walking into the Real Madrid dressing room and everybody gets up, stands up, shakes his hand, is in awe? Cristiano Ronaldo, Gareth Bale, those guys are in awe of Zinedine Zidane. That's how Mexican players feel about Rafa Marquez. Rafa Marquez has arguably the best career of any Mexican footballer. If you encompass club team and national team, I don't think it's even close. Hugo Sanchez had a ridiculous club career, an unbelievable goal scorer. But when it came to the national team, he didn't come close like Rafa Marquez. Rafa Marquez was captaining a national team as a teenager. He played in 5 World Cups. Rafa Marquez is known around the world right now. You're inspiring players, a generation, a program that needs some sort of hope. I think that's the one thing that's really dawned on me. I never thought I would see it happen, is the Mexican fan base, a lot of them have lost hope with the Mexican national team. It used to always be La Esperanza won't go away. The hope will always be there. Mundiales, they come, they go. We're going to be present. And now there's this disconnect with the fan base and the players and coaches that I've never seen before. Not like this. I think it desperately needs a shot of, sound cliche, a shot of hope here. Some Rafa Marquez, inspiration. I think those players looking up to Rafa Marquez, going to that dressing room, I think they'll kill themselves for him.
I think you're right. And I know you think it won't happen. I know you don't want to be mal pensado, but maybe you know a little bit too well about the inner workings of Mexican football. And it makes you think that this won't happen. Allow me the hope to look at the reports, hear the reports, and fantasize, think about a world in which it does happen. Because to your point, it would be supremely exciting. If you think about his resume and not just what it would mean to the emotional aspect of motivating players. This is a dude who has done it at the highest level. And I think most importantly, because of the Barcelona education, he's been educated in football at the highest level. That's a degree beyond just being a great player at any great club. He not only played at Barcelona at a time when La Masia was hugely influential, he also coached at the kind of top end of what La Masia is developing. And I think everybody thinks of that as one of the great schools of world football. Ain't nobody in Mexico with that experience, Herc. Ain't nobody in Mexico with close to that experience. You could throw the name Hugo Sanchez out there. He got his shot with the national team, but even his experience was not that experience. And so I think to have a guy like that in Mexican soccer, Herc, Rafa Marquez is a bit of a unicorn. And I hear you when you say this is a guy that you need to use as much as possible, as long as possible. As far as his influence on the current team, I wonder if you feel it or sense it at all. I feel like I hear from some fans that they'll see little things, or more pundits will kind of point out that here's a little thing that is a Rafa thing or a Barcelona thing or something you've seen somewhere else. I have to say, Herc, what I see Aguirre's, overwhelming footprint, and maybe I don't have the tactical expertise to see it. So tell me, what are the ways in which Rafa Marquez, if we can think about what Mexico might play in the future, what are the ways he's influencing them now?
Well, take a look at their center backs. Cesar Montes, Johan Vasquez particularly, left-footed center back, and what he does with the ball. And look at the triangle they form with Eric Lira, and how Eric Lira drops in as a third center back. That is all Rafa Marquez influenced. That is Rafa Marquez to a T. Those three working together, two in a tandem. One goes into the midfield, one drops back. You always have three defending, and you have an extra player on the ball. And that player on the ball, Eric Lira, who advances from a deep line position into midfield and connects. That's Rafa Marquez. People don't realize Rafa Marquez wasn't just a good footballer, a great footballer. He played in the best football team ever. He was a mainstay. He was a big player there. He was a respected individual in Pep Guardiola's Barcelona. This is a player with the ball at his foot that is another point guard, quarterback, orchestrator from a deep line position. I see that when I watch, especially Eric Lira. Lira, Cesar Montes, and Johan Vasquez. I see that triangle. I see that know-how and that ability. The influence is there.
Does Mexico have the horses for it? You know, I've long made the argument that Mexico, in an effort to advance to the famous quinto, now sexto partido, needs to be more pragmatic, needs to forget the tú al tú, no, trying to play with the giants and kind of falling gloriously at the end. Maybe it wouldn't be such a direct comp to Barcelona, right? I understand it's not going to be the tiki-taka of 2010, but does Mexico have the dudes to play that style? I think of some guys that could play that style. I think of a Gil Mora growing under Rafa Marquez, and you know, your eyes get wide about the influence that could have on that type of talent. But beyond that, I wonder, does Mexico really have the players to play a ball-dominant system in today's international football?
You've got a goalkeeper in Emi Ochoa who's got size and is very good with the ball at his feet. You've got two center backs who could be around for the next cycle. Okay, you've got an Eric Lira who I think is heavily underrated and can play in a lot of teams in and around Europe. You've got guys who are coming up like Elias Montiel, who's not getting the time of day right now. Pachuca player is a beast, a beast. You have Gil Mora, who knows what Marcel Ruiz will look like when he comes back. You want to throw in a Brian Gutierrez in there? Go ahead and do that. It's a player who's emerging right now. A Richie Ledesma. You've got players in and around the program who are coming up. Some of those players have not come up, but interesting, fast, vertical profiles like a Yadel Padilla, like a Hugo Camberos. You've got La Hormiga. You've got players, the profile players, to play exciting, fast, vertical football. You've got the horses to do that. You're not going to dominate the ball, but you can play within a system with some of these players and say, you know what? I like my chances. I don't think it's far-fetched that if you take a chance, Iker Fimbres, I didn't mention as well in that midfield, that if you take a chance on some of these players to play together and you say, these are going to be my horses, to use your words, your terms, that maybe you could win a race or two.
Yeah, some of these guys that you're talking about are really young, so they're not just like 20, 30 prospects. They may well be super relevant in 2034. Which makes me ask the question of Rafa Marquez.
They got to be relevant before that, Seb. They have to be relevant before that.
Okay. The point is to say that there's a deep young group of Mexican players who could help this pool beyond just the next World Cup. Would you be against the idea of Rafa Marquez sticking around for 2 World Cups? Because that idea, the idea of the multi-cycle manager, which is something that actually the only other Mexican player with a similar, comparable resume to Rafa Marquez, Hugo Sanchez. That's what he wanted. He wanted 12 years in charge of the Mexican national team. He didn't quite get that. But I wonder if Rafa Marquez, based on this young group that you're talking about, and his age, if it's really more of an 8-year project, if this is something to think about for the long term, not to overlook 2030 in any way, but to say that this is a guy you want to give the reins of Mexican football to for the better part of a decade.
Thinking about more than one cycle before the guys even grab the clipboard and been in charge, it is just insane. I won't do it. I won't allow you to do it. You and I have been around long enough to see coaches just blunder and spoil unbelievable talents and opportunities. So I want to see what Rafa Marquez is going to be like. Because of who he is, his player resume, he's going to get that opportunity. He's not the first country to do it. South Korea, Hong Young-bo, national hero, coached the national team. He's on a second term with the national team right now. He coached the Olympic team because of who he is as a player, who he was as a player, not what he did as a coach. These things happen all the time in world football. You get your foot in the door because of what you've done for the program. Same thing with Hugo Sanchez. You keep it in the door for what you do with the team. And until I see that, I'm not budging on I'm not even thinking 2 cycles.
All right, so just quick note on Mexico's young players. On the March window, there was 5 guys 22 and under in the group, and that didn't include Gil Mora and 90% of the guys that you just mentioned. So there really is a good core there for Mexico. Check us out on our YouTube channel. It's Vamos Network. Like and subscribe over there. You can follow us on social media as well, Vamos MIB on Instagram and Twitter. Don't go anywhere. Go ahead and at me is next. All right, my man, we've made it to the end of the show. Time for a little go ahead and at me. Vamos MIB on Instagram and Twitter if you want to get involved. Today's entry comes from Andas, who we've heard from plenty of times before. He asks, where do you think Raul Jimenez will be playing next season? I know he said he wants to stay in the Premier League, but could you see a MLS or Liga MX team convincing him to play in North America next season? Raul Jimenez right now, 34. I think he turns 35 in May. So, Herc, what do you think? What's a good next stop for him after Fulham?
I'm glad you said after Fulham. I think everything is lining up for a move out of Fulham. Fulham aren't looking at Raul Jimenez as their 9 next season. They've already tried a bid for Ricardo Pepi, and it was a groundbreaking bid. It would have been one of their highest transfers in their history. So they're clearly looking for a 9. Rodrigo Muniz is another 9 that has usually played in front of Raul Jimenez. The Brazilian has been often injured this season, so it's gotten in between his playing time. But Raul Jimenez is still a very serviceable player, and there's a part of me that thinks like some of these Mexican players, these Mexican legends, if you will, don't want to come back to Liga MX, and there's a wide range of reasons for that. The first and foremost being they don't have private lives in there of Mexico. You know, anywhere they go, there will be pictures taken, cameras in their face for them and their families. They will be scrutinized at every turn. It comes with the territory, it comes with the job. Also, I'm sure a heavy price tag will come with that as well. But he's on another platform right now in terms of Mexican players. Right now in La Selección, they say Raúl y 10 más. So Raúl Jimenez is a very big deal in Mexico. And if you take a deal in Major League Soccer, you're coming with the expectation of living a different type of life, different type of lifestyle for yourself, for your family, different type of pressure or lack thereof that doesn't exist like it would elsewhere. He could go play easily and be a DP in a Dallas market, a Houston market, one of the 2 LA markets, maybe a little bit more difficult, but he would have a market. And that is the scenario here. I think he is a player that is destined for Major League Soccer, not because it's a drop in level for himself, but because it's a drop in pressure and a drop in the atmosphere that maybe he would not want to be around for himself and his family anymore.
I know obviously it's not about money for him. You know, he's had a great career. Surely he's got plenty of it. But where do you think he has more earning power? Because obviously as a star in Mexico, going back to some teams, there are teams that can pay him very, very well. But I think he'd have quite a market here as well. I think there are no shortage of teams given his background and given the marketing effects that he could have on your organization that would be tripping over themselves, frankly, to sign this guy. So I think there'd be a big market for him here. Don't you agree?
I think he makes more money in Mexico. First and foremost, people don't realize there is a net versus gross element that comes to playing in Mexico. Gross, as many of you have jobs here in the United States, you have a federal tax and you have a state tax. You're going to get taxed either way. Uncle Sam's going to get his share. In Mexico, those taxes are paid for you by the club, so it's tax-free. There's a net aspect to that. So obviously $1 million net versus $1 million gross isn't exactly $1 million. And if you play in California, you're making $600,000. You see how that works? So I think he's got more of a market value in Mexico. Some of the ownership groups and sporting directors in Major League Soccer have learned from their past, and if they desperately want to seek to eliminate this retirement league perspective that many have, they don't go around offering 2 to 3 year deals for players in their mid-30s, 35 years of age. I can see something like that in Mexico, but maybe not at the club that Raul wants. Raul's dream move back to Mexico would be going to Club America and retiring there. I don't see Club America with the new policies that they have doing that. Do you see Club America offering him a 2 to 3 year deal to retire? They just learned right now from Henry Martin.
Different level players, but the club definitely has the need.
Not for America. Henry Martin is more to Club America than Raul Jimenez.
Henry Martin today is not what Raul Jimenez is today.
You're not going to take that chance because you've already taken that chance on somebody who had more equity within the club. So I don't think they would go down that road again. there are teams who will. Like, could I see one of the Regios shelling out some money? Just, sure. It's Raul Jimenez. Absolutely. I could even see a Juarez doing that. I really could. I don't see Club America. You correct me if I'm wrong here. That's your team.
I don't see it happening, but I do see a need, and I know America is nothing if not a romantic club, so maybe where there's a will, there's a way, and maybe for him, there's a way as well. I would actually love to see him in MLS. I'd love to see him with your old team, the LA Galaxy. I think you drop him in that market, in that rivalry, and it gives the Galaxy a little bit of juice that they're lacking. I think the Galaxy could be good again, but you need some real star power at some point, and he's star power. He's certainly star power in that LA market. All right, Herc, final thought for you here on episode 9 of Duel Nats.
You brought it today, Seb. You and your AYSO jersey. You came with it.
My AYSO jersey. Don't be hating on NISA and the lower tiers of American soccer, which we love. Of course, you can check us out over on our YouTube channel. It's the Vamos Network. On social, it's Vamos MIB on Instagram as well as Twitter. That's it for Duel Nats. We'll see you next week right here on Vamos and the Men in Blazers Media Network.